Rigging is the process for creating a control structure for the movement of a model. We will begin rigging with dummies and other helper objects, then move on to bones and skinning in future videos. The important part of the rig lies in the pivot points, so that is where we start. I have this completed model to start. It's made from the following objects: a sphere for the light bulb, an editable poly for the lampshade, 2 more for the arms, and 1 for the base. Pay attention to the position of the gizmos for the object when they are selected. This determines where the object will rotate, scale, and get positional data from. As is demonstrated here, when rotating the shade with the current gizmo location, it doesn't turn where it logically should. This is easily fixed. Select the object, then click the Hierarchy tab in the command panel. In the Adjust Pivot rollout, click the Affect Pivot Only. The gizmo in the viewport changes. Now when we move the gizmo, only the pivot point moves, not the object. We now have the gizmo located in a logical place on the object. Click the Affect Pivot Only button in the Hierarchy panel. The shade now rotates in the logical place. This process must be performed on all objects to ensure proper rotation of lamp parts. The bulb won't move on its own, so we can link it directly to the shade. When we link objects, we are creating a hierarchy system that allows one object to control the properties of other objects. A common way to express this is as a parent-child relationship. The actions of the parent object affect the properties of the child objects, but not the other way around. In the main toolbar, click the Select and Link tool. It looks like a linked chain. Select the child mesh, in this case the bulb. Click and drag to the parent mesh, in this case the lampshade. Any movement, scaling, rotation, etc. applied to the shade will now affect the bulb. Conversely, movement, scaling, rotation, etc. applied to the bulb will have no effect on the shade. A parent may have many children, but a child can only have one parent. They can, however, have grandparents. We will explore this concept as we set up the rig. Once created, a linked set of objects may be broken by selecting them and then the Unlink Selection tool from the main toolbar. It looks like a broken chain. As a general rule, it is best practices to keep the animations and the mesh separate. This rule applies to more than just animations and meshes. Separate elements are easier to modify, and if something breaks, there's a chance it won't break everything else. To accomplish this, we use controllers. In the Create panel, click the Helpers button. It looks like a tape measure. Here there are a number of different helpers to aid you in 3ds Max. I encourage you to explore these on your own to gain a deeper understanding of their usefulness. We will be looking at dummy and point helper objects. By default, helper objects do not render. Switch to a top view and create a dummy object by selecting Dummy and clicking and dragging in the viewport. Rename the dummy object Lampshade Controller. In a front view, use the Align tool in the main toolbar to align the dummy to the lampshade mesh, with pivot point to pivot point chosen. The dummy moves to the lampshade pivot point. Using the Select and Link tool in the main toolbar, make the lampshade a child of the dummy object. Any movement, rotation, scaling, etc. of the lampshade controller dummy will be applied to not only the lampshade but the bulb as well. You'll remember the bulb is a child of the lampshade, and the lampshade is now the child of the dummy controller. So you could say the bulb is the grandchild of the dummy object. We continue this process down the lamp, creating dummy controllers and linking them to each of the pivot points in the chain: the upper arm, lower arm, and the base. With the dummies created, properly placed, and now the proud parents of the lamp mesh parts, it is time to link the controllers. Beginning with the lampshade controller, link it to the upper arm controller. Link the upper arm controller to the lower arm controller. Link the lower arm controller to the base controller. Any changes applied to the base controller affect everything down the chain, beginning with the lower arm controller, which passes the change down to its child, the upper arm controller. The upper arm controller then passes the change to its child, the lampshade controller. What is the relationship between the lamp base controller and the lampshade controller? This will be a question on the quiz. In the main toolbar, click the Schematic View button to show the hierarchy in a graphical way. From this view, the parent-child relationships are easily identified. This type of rig is called a forward kinematic rig. I will now demonstrate a simple animation using forward kinematics. This method works well, but there are other ways to animate, including what is called inverse kinematics. To use inverse kinematics, we must modify the current rig. Select the entire lamp system by double-clicking the lamp controller dummy. Doing this will select all children and grandchildren. Once selected, shift drag to make a copy of all the selected objects. With the lampshade controller dummy selected, go to the animation drop-down at the top, hover over IK solvers, then choose High Solver. There is now a rubber band linking the lampshade controller dummy and the cursor. Click the lower arm controller dummy to create an IK or inverse kinematic chain between the lampshade controller dummy and the lower arm controller dummy. Change to wireframe mode to see the IK chain. It appears as a white line connecting the dummies in the chain with a crosshair at the beginning dummy. Now, with the newly created IK chain selected, we can affect all the points in the chain at once, as demonstrated here. But it's not finished. There is currently no way to rotate the lampshade using the IK chain. It also rotates on its own as we move the IK chain, which we do not want. Additionally, if we try to move the lampshade with the lampshade controller dummy, it breaks. We are going to use another helper object to fix this issue. In the Create Helpers panel, choose a point helper. After creating the helper, use the Align tool to align it to the lampshade controller dummy. Once aligned, link the lampshade mesh and the IK chain to the point helper. Move and rotate the point helper to move and rotate the lampshade. Here is an example of animation using the inverse kinematic rig. The final thing we want to do is clean up the file by putting the elements of the rig on separate layers so we can lock them down. Begin by opening the Layers panel from the main toolbar. Here we can explore and control the layers in the file. Back to the main toolbar to change the selection mode, select Geometry. Now all we can select is Geometry. Click and drag to select the geometry that makes up your model. Once the geometry is selected, click the Create New Layer button in the Layer Explorer. All selected objects are now moved to the new layer. Rename this layer Geometry. Right-click this layer and freeze it. Since our model is controlled with dummies, there is no reason to be able to select the geometry. I will now do this for the control rig, locking down everything but the base controller dummy and the point helper. That's it for this video. Happy animating!